Hello and welcome to day 2 of the 2021 BFI Feature Film Festival. My name is Amon Warmann and I am a contributing editor at Empire Magazine. Today, I'll be speaking with producer Phil Clarke. Hello to you, Phil.
Hello.
How's it going today?
Greetings. All right. Still locked down, cabin fever. Not sure whether I'm talking to you, Amon, or just talking to myself. It's got to that state now. I think everyone's looking forward to sort of return to some normalcy, I guess. But
Absolutely, 100%. Before we get into your amazing career in earnest, can you just explain what a producer does?
It's a really good question. And in fact, there is no sort of, universal complete answer to this, because there are as many different producers as there are different shows. But basically, the producer is the first man or woman in and the last man or woman out on a show. So a show usually starts with the producer. What tends to happen is that if you are going to pitch a show, let's say, for example, a writer will send you a script, you like the script, you probably work with the writer a bit to try and make the script better or improve it as you see it. Then you, the producer, pitches the script with the writer to a broadcaster. Let's say the broadcaster says yes, which is rare. We'll come on to that later. The broadcaster says yes, then the producer is responsible for putting a whole show together. So that means, to start with, hiring people, hiring the director, hiring the line producer. Those people then tend to, bring their own people onto the show. All the time you're working closely with the writer. And then similarly, you're working very closely with the director. Where the director's responsibility starts and ends and where the producer's starts and ends is often quite opaque. And if it's a good relationship between a writer and a director and a producer, the three of you, or however many writers, it feels like you're just a gang and you're all just trying to make a good show as possible. So that's how it goes. But often, certainly in comedy, the producer is editorially responsible for the show. So if there's a problem, it's the broadcaster phones up the producer, not the director. So you're editorially responsible and you're responsible for delivery of the show as well. And you're also individually responsible for people's welfare on the show. So, and a duty of care as well. So anyway, so you make the show. Let's say we're going to make a pilot. So we do the pilot. Producer is often in the edit as well, comes and goes in the edit. Director's usually in the edit all the time. Producer also liaises with the broadcaster to make sure that the show is something like what they expected it to be. The broadcaster will come and visit, commissioning editors come and visit, give notes as well, and the producer sort of handles all that as well. And then oversees the delivery of the show to the broadcaster. So that's a very garbled and really sort of like basic thing. But basically, as I say, you're the first man in and the last man out. And that's really your job. And you are, certainly in comedy, you're editorially responsible for the show. Now, inside that, there's a million things that you could do. Sometimes when the show's working well, maybe you're filming, there's less for the producer to do. It's just nice to be on set. As a producer, I always like to have the writers on set, which is quite common now. But early on in my career, sometimes people would say, why have we got the writers on set? What are they doing here? But I'll come on to that later, but it's really useful to work closely with the writers all the way through the show. And really, sometimes you're not doing anything. Sometimes there isn't enough hours in the day. And, if there are problems, they will come to the producer. When you're on set, there's always this moment, I know fellow producers will recognize this, where you see two people probably talking, two heads of department talking sort of the other side of the car park. You see them finishing talking and then they both start walking towards you and there's a big problem coming your way. So, it's a bit of jack of all trades being a producer in that sense. But the most important thing for me and for most producers is working with writers. and working really closely with writers and seeing that and protecting their script as well, and seeing it through and liaising with the broadcaster. There you go.
So what you're saying is the producer doesn't do much.
Yes, there are, yeah, at times, yeah.
That sounds like you wear a lot of hats throughout a production. Out of all the stuff you just said, what is your favorite role? What's your favorite hat to put on? What's your least favorite role to take on?
I'd say favorite hat is working with writers at the beginning of the project, early on in a show, and that's lovely to work with writers and, you know, polish up a script, and that's terrific. I think also it's always exciting. First day of filming is always brilliantly exciting, because I think it's just like, my God, we're actually going to make this thing now, which is amazing. Filming can be incredibly boring for a producer, you know, and particularly if it's going well, it's you know, it can be really boring. The edit I love, because the edit is sort of like writing again. So you're rewriting the show in the edit. And if you're working with creative directors and editors, it's really exciting place to be. And yeah, the best way I can describe it as edit is you're just rewriting the script again, and you can change things so, you know, beyond recognition in an edit. So I would say, you know, the quick answer is that it's the beginning of the show and the end of the show. And the bit in the middle, the filming bit can be, as I say, very tiring and very, very boring as well. You know, I'm always humbled by the hours that film crews work and, you know, crews work. I mean, 12-hour day minimum with, you know, often a long travel at the end of each day, and that every day, sometimes 6-day weeks.
Absolutely. Hopefully we can get all those wonderful people back to work soon once we're out of lockdown. But before you got into producing, I know that you were an actor and a stand-up comic, because I did all my I went all the way through your IMDb profile. I'm like, hold on, this guy was an actor. So what were you, when you were first thinking about joining the business, was that your first choice? And what were your memories of that time?
Yeah, I sort of, it's very kind of you to call me an actor. I was a terrible actor. I was no good, but I wanted to be a comic. Well, I didn't start off in the business. The last job I did before going sort of full time was I was working at Heathrow Airport, and I was a PR man at Heathrow Airport, and I was terrible at the job. I was really terrible, and I think, if I remember rightly, I was sacked for just being rubbish. But I sort of then, I'd been doing it part-time with my comedy partner. I was in a double act with a guy called Simon Godley, he was a massive influence on me, and is still a really good friend, and still one of the funniest men I've ever worked with. And we started doing the comedy circuit in the 80s, just part-time. So about 2 years I was working. I worked at the Army Museum as well in Chelsea, and, you know, just did normal jobs like, you know, most people. And in the evenings we'd try and do gigs and open spots, and we'd die, you know, you get 5 minutes and you'd go on and you'd die, and, you know, you sort of just keep going. But it was an exciting time because the comedy circuit was just sort of starting. The comic strip with Rick Mayall and gang were on Channel 4, which had just started as well. It was only a few years old, and these guys were like, wow, this is, you can do it for yourself. And there was sort of the punk thing in the 70s was very much like, just do it for yourself, get up and do it for yourself. And we'd be sometimes doing gigs where we'd be taking money on the door, we'd be on the door taking money, and then we all run round and then do a show. We worked a lot with Mark Lamar, who, you know, was at the Compare, and at one time I ran a comedy club in Watford, the Pump House in Watford, and it was twice a week, and Mark Lamar was the regular host of the show. This is before he became famous, and but it was all that. We would just take money on the door and then run around to the show. So, and having got sacked from Heathrow Airport, I then went full time, and we went full time for about 5 years, you know, as comics, and I sort of loved it. It was all through my 20s, and it's an invaluable experience because you understand how tough it is. You know, the quintessential night when people ask me what it was like being a comic. I remember there was one night you were doing the Comedy Store. Simon and I were playing the Comedy Store, and there's an early show and a late show. And if you were lucky, you could often try and book a gig in between that. So you'd go to a pub, and the first the early show, we sort of stormed it and encored, and it was amazing. And we were really sort of up, and we went and did another gig. I can't remember where, it was in a pub nearby, and it went really well. We came back to do the late show, and we died, you know, 400 people chanting "fuck off."
Wow.
You can do that, yeah. And it just sort of summed up what it is to be a comic sometimes. Same night, same venue, same act, you know, and it's lap of the gods. And as you get more experience, you can sort of handle different audiences, but it's amazing. So yeah, no, I did that for 7 years in total. Yeah. So that's
Amazing.
how I started.
So why did you then decide to shift into producing?
Well, absolutely, God's honest truth was that, you know, when you're living as a comic, it's all hand to mouth. So it was cash in hand. So we're getting cash in hand. And I used to also, both Simon and I, to sort of scrape a living, we'd also go for advert auditions, and we'd sort of audition for adverts. I do remember one audition where I was asked to sort of pretend you're fighting a chicken. And I sort of remember lying on the ground, pretending I was fighting a chicken. And suddenly had that moment where it's like, what the hell am I doing? What, you know, what is that I've ever come to? But the truth of the matter is I got a massive tax bill. This sounds because on the street. I got a massive tax bill to pay, and I couldn't pay it because, you know, it's just, as I say, living as a comic. And I knew I had to find some kind of job because I was in trouble. And so I was literally looking through the newspapers, or someone told me that they were taking on trainee radio producers just for a year's contract. And Simon and I had done a bit of radio, so I knew a bit about that world. We'd done a couple of pilots, I think, and I think, guested on other people's shows. So I knew a bit about that. And I thought, oh, this is brilliant. But at least, you know, that's a job that I'd love to do. I'll just do it for a year, then I'll go back to performing, you know, at the end of the year. It was that, or finding a part-time job, or, you know, going back to Heathrow Airport, which was like, you know, terror of that. So I applied for a trainee producer job and got it, and got the job. There were about 7 of us all joined at the same time. And I just loved it from the minute we started. The buzz that you get from a live performance, I found you got exactly the same buzz from producing a show. And working in radio is a brilliant starting place, a brilliant place to start as a producer, because it's pure. It's just you and the script. And there's a studio manager, and you have to direct, produce, you know, script editor. You're so many things in radio. And you're also working often with 2 ends of the spectrum of the business. People often, you know, famous people who are now in the twilight of their career, and not in a horrible way, but it's just, you know, and they tend to sort of come back to radio or doing shows. And people who are new, absolutely new. And as a producer, you get to work with both ends of that spectrum, and that is also invaluable. So and I was a radio producer for 7 years, and I really loved it. But I ended up going into television because I was eventually I was banned for blasphemy working on radio. I made a show called Amon, Older Brother of Jesus, and I think it was Paul Donovan, the radio critic, took great offence and said it was blasphemous, and wrote to the then controller of Radio 4, James Boyle, who agreed with him that it was blasphemous. I got called up to sort of, you know, the office in Broadcasting House, and had to go up to the top office sort of thing there. And I sort of got told off and told that the show was not going to be aired because it was blasphemous. And I knew my card had been marked. You know, if you're working at Radio 4 and you're known as a blasphemer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that sort of slightly propelled me into television. But, you know, I worked with some great people in radio. Mark Steele in particular, loved working with Mark and on all his shows. And as I say, it's a brilliant place to work as a producer and as a creative. And with TV, there's lots of things that can sort of get in the way of a person's vision. But radio, as I say, there's very little. It's you and the microphone. So, you know, it's a lovely place to work.
Working in the creative industry, you know, everyone has their mentors, the people who really sort of help them along their way. Who taught you the most about your craft as a producer?
It's a really good question. And basically, the honest answer is everyone you work with influences you, and all along the way. And you know, you will relearn lessons off people, lessons that you learned years ago, and then you forget and you relearn lessons off people. And so everyone you work with does influence you. I think people who gave me jobs, you know, Peter Fincham was a big influence on me when I worked at Talkback. Just seeing how he ran that company, it was a great education, and it was very, you know, he was very impressive. Andrew O'Connor, who ran Objective Productions, again, I learned a lot of, you know, really did, between Peter and Andrew, a lot about how to run companies. Channel 4 Jay Hunt, how to run a channel. My goodness, that's a job. And I learned a lot of her as well. But also people that I sort of, you know, worked with creatively, writers a lot. You know, Sam and Jesse obviously wrote Peep Show. You know, learnt a lot off them. But also fellow producers along the way. Ian Morris and Shane Allen had big influences on my careers, and you know, I owe them a great deal. Robert Popper as well, and producers I work with at Objective, Lee Hupfields, Ben Farrell. You know, these you know, talented people who influence you, and you pick things up without even realizing it, that we're influencing each other. So I could look back, loved working with Becky Martin, the director, you know, fantastic times working with her. So, yeah, and of course I mentioned already Simon Godley, my original comedy partner, who just, you know, as I say, is still one of the funniest men I've ever worked with, and you know, how to play an audience and how to hold an audience and how to, you know, Simon was one of the few men who could get a laugh before he'd even reached the microphone, just by walking on stage. And so all these people have influences, and you learn even without realizing, you know what is, you know, what you're sort of absorbing from them. And as I say, I've mentioned Becky Martin, but she would be a good person because she was always, she always compensated for my weaknesses. And as you go on in your career, you realize what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And then, you know, sometimes I think look for people who balance out your weaknesses, the things that you're weaker at. And Becky always had a saying about, she has a very good radar for anything that's hammy or cheesy or eggy. So, and her, you know, thing she used to say to me, Phil, it's all the foodstuffs. It's hammy, it's cheesy, and it's eggy. You know, we've got to cut it. And so it's like working with people like that, you know, and you just, you know, as I say, you learn things and you influence each other. So, but the truthful answer in the end is it's everyone you work with influences you. Everybody. It's you know, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I like that answer. I've spoken to a few producers, and they're all unique in their different ways. But one thing that's pretty universal between them is that they will say that being able to have an honest back and forth with their team is paramount. Being able to tell your director and writer what you think, even when it's not what they necessarily want to hear, is very important. Would you agree? And if so, how do you go about cultivating that?
Yes, they're absolutely right, because a lot of the time, and I sort of, you know, you asked me about what producing, but a lot of the time when you're producing, you're telling people things that they don't want to hear. And that is, you know, one of the most sort of common things that you have to do as a producer. And it's about building trust and a good relationship, and also building a team, and that we're all in it together, and that our loyalty as a team is to the show, and that we're making the best show possible. And that's what really everybody wants. But there's definitely a moment when you're producing that's probably about, and other producers I think will recognize this, it's probably about 2 or 3 weeks into filming when everybody hates you. Absolutely everyone hates you, because you're not there to make people's lives easier. You're there to make as good a show as possible. And that sometimes means asking difficult things of people and pushing and asking for things that possibly are not really fair. But at the end of the day, if it makes a better show, everybody, that's what everybody wants. So it's sort of, working as a team is really important, I think. And I think it's the more that you can sort of endear a culture of team working, that's the best thing you can do as a producer. But yeah, there's definitely moments where everyone hates the producer. It's a bit like childbirth, it's sort of, once the baby's born, it's like, oh, it's beautiful, and everyone forgets the pain.
Well, maybe the men do. I'm pretty sure the women don't.
That's absolutely true.
So, what are the things that you look for when you're thinking about producing a project then?
That's a really good question, because there are two ways to sort of go about shaping a project to make a program or to sell it. And one of the things about being producers as well is you have to be a salesman, and you're selling to broadcasters all the time. But I think there's one way you could do it, where you listen to the commissioning briefs that come from broadcasters, and you really try and mold a show to meet that brief. And overall, we all sort of know what a sort of Channel 4 show is like, and we sort of know what a BBC One show is like. A little bit more difficult nowadays, because the streamers, which is, provides many ports of call now for producers, a little less easy to define. We sort of know what an HBO show is like and what a Netflix show is like, but there's there's quite a big crossover there, I think, at times sometimes. So anyway, there's one way of approaching it where you listen very carefully and go, okay, they've asked for a show with, it must have 2 dogs in it, and and a merry-go-round, and you go, okay, well, let's go, find a writer and let's do something about a merry-go-round and some dogs. Or the other way, which is the hard way, but which is more satisfying, is you just say to a writer, what do you want to write? What do you want to say? And I would recommend that is actually the best way to go about it. Not that you ignore commissioning briefs completely, but in the end of the day, it's got to come from the heart. But what I do say to writers is, look, that's, having said what they want to write, I could then tell you that's going to be difficult to sell, or that's going to be easier to sell. But even if it's still difficult to sell, if you want to do it, I'm up for it. Let's give it a go. And because it's those shows that are the hits, it's the shows that come from the heart, not the shows that are manufactured. They're the ones that actually become a hit. And actually, when I was in radio, I did a pilot called Virus, and I thought it was the best. I thought it was the best. This is a good lesson. I thought it was the best show I would ever make, and I was immensely proud of it. And I sort of played it to my boss, Jonathan James Moore, who was a lovely man. Actually, he was a real comedy aficionado, and he loved it as well. And he said, right, okay, we'll get this up to Radio 4 straight away. We'll fast track it. And of course, Radio 4 turned it down because it wasn't what they were after at all. And I was terribly depressed about it and thought, that's the best show I can ever make. And that's it. My career's sort of over, really. I'll never top that show. And of course, and I was sort of really depressed, went back and talked to the boss, Jonathan, and he said, and I said, is there any point, trying to do something original or left field? And he said, yeah, of course. He said, that is the point. That's the whole point. And he said, you've just got to keep going. You've got to keep throwing these, and eventually one of them will stick. He said, but don't give up. It was brilliant advice. Don't give up. Secondly, you will think of a better show. You will have a better idea. There's always a better joke or a better idea around the corner. Don't despair and keep going. And it was brilliant advice from him. And that is the best advice I could give to anyone in the business, is like, keep going. The whole of your life as a producer, the real theme of it as a producer, and I think for writers and creatives and performers, the real theme is rejection. That's the reality of everyone's life in television or anything creative, or actors, or what you have to deal with most of all and most often is rejection. And that never, trust me, I've been doing this for 30 years, that never ends. Most things, 90% of the things that you want to make the answer's no. And, you know, it's tough. And sometimes it's tough to overcome that, because you've put your heart into it, whether you're a producer or writer or performer or, you know, director, your heart goes into these things. And so, and most times it's no, but it means the times when it is yes, you really have to savor and enjoy, and, you know, and just keep going, keep going. There's an attritional factor in this, in the, you know, how many knocks can you take?
100%. No, I definitely get that. You may have sort of kind of answered this question already, but I wanted to ask, what's the strongest initial pitch you've had in the room? And then on the flip side of that, what's a project that when you heard it, you were a bit iffy on, but as it came into focus, you were like, this was a really, really great idea. I'm glad that we did it.
Oh, that's a really, really good question. I mean, so many pitches. I'd have to have a little think about that, you know, some really good pitches. There definitely been some moments where people have pitched or talked about something, and just straight away you've gone, yeah, that would be brilliant. And I'll be honest, there's some shows we've got in development at the moment, which I'm just thinking, God, it'd be brilliant to make this. If we can find someone who will say yes to this, it'll be, you know, how exciting to make. I'm just trying to think of a show that I was like, I'm not too sure about this. Yeah, where was it? One example. Years and years ago, I was the exec on Bo Selecta, and I remember talking to Lee, who's a lovely man, and the guys, and saying, oh, I'm not really sure about. Are you sure about this, guys? You know, no. You know, some of these sketches are not sure. And they were like, Phil, promise you, these are funny. You know, this is funny stuff. And they were right, and I was wrong. And they knew what made them laugh, and it was a really good lesson in that. You have to sort of just trust your own instincts when it comes to these things. And it used to be played into an audience, and I used to sit, and, you know, the audience would be screaming with laughter. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Peep Show, I think I loved straight away when the guys sort of pitched it and talked about it. I just thought, oh no, that's great, that's brilliant. But yeah, there are some other pitches where sometimes you think, oh, I'm not entirely sure, and then you warm up to them, you know, usually through someone else's enthusiasm for it, or suddenly you see it. I think sometimes you just can't see something sometimes, and a lot of it is to do with chemistry of who you're working with. And some people just walk in the room and you click and you get it, and you're making each other laugh, and it's really funny. And other people, you think that's a really good idea, but why do I feel so tired? I don't know. You know, that's that thing of just sometimes you know, you're not the right producer for them, and they'll find another producer, and they click, and it, you know, and they're away. But it's
talk about,
yeah, sorry.
Now I was gonna say, you talked about trusting your instincts there, and I think one of the roles of a producer is to sort of gauge what the reaction in the wider world might be.
Yeah.
And to that point, I wanted to talk about Brass Eye, which was your pedophilia special that you produced. Releasing that in the 2001 climate, what kind of conversations were you having about what the reception might be in the build-up to it? And then once it dropped and the press and the audience were doing what they were doing, what conversations were you having once it dropped as well?
Yeah, it's a good question, that, because it took a long time to make, and working with Chris Morris was a real privilege. And, you know, he raises everyone's game, you know, around him. And I think we were so buried in the show, and so, you know, it was his vision and his idea, and he had something very important, particularly at the time, to say. And I remember having a meeting with him and thinking, yeah, that is brilliant. You know, he told me he's sort of, and I just really wanted in, because I just thought, oh no, you're spot on, you know, you're absolutely spot on about the hypocrisy that was, you know, particularly in the media about paedophilia. But you get so buried in the show, it was such an intense show to make, that actually you know, we sort of almost forgot about what reaction it might get. And I do, this is absolutely true, remember we sort of made the show and we delivered it, and it was all ready to go. And obviously it had been, you know, there had been a lot of tricky legal wranglings, and it was a bit of a tightrope to walk at times, but we sort of got there and it was all done. And I remember being in Peter Fincham's office, and he said, do do you think it will get much of a, make much of a stir? And so we were both like, I don't know. I honestly don't know. And then literally the day after it went out, there was sort of, head on Daily Mail, I think it was, TV's sickest program ever headline. And yeah, it did make quite a stir. But truth be told, you're so buried in the show at the time, we sort of didn't really think too much of it. But it was considered very controversial show at the time. And, I'm very proud and lucky to have sort of, worked with Chris on it, really. It was a privilege. Yeah.
And you've worked with Channel 4 and with BBC, and I definitely want to touch on sort of both of those things. But before that, you formed your own production company, Objective Productions. What was your motivation behind that?
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't form Objective, but I was a sort of, I was a shareholder in Objective, but Andrew O'Connor had already formed Objective before I arrived, and I think it had already won. Basically, Andrew O'Connor had been a magician, and he was working with Anthony Owen, and they were making magic shows. And I think they made a show called The Quick Trick Show, which had already won a BAFTA. So a very small company, but it was, but they were already set up. But Andrew asked me to join because at the time I was producing Big Train, and we were told that we were going to do a third series of Big Train, the sketch show. And then the BBC at short notice cancelled it, and we were all caught on the back foot. I think it's because they didn't think it had rated very well. And at the time I remember it got 2.8 million, which nowadays would be like a hit show. But anyway, it was considered, it hadn't quite rated well enough. And so it was cancelled at short notice. And I'd sort of already met Sam and Jesse. And then they sort of said, look, we've made a 10-minute taster tape for this thing. It wasn't called Peep Show, it's called Point of View at that time. And I had to look at it and said, oh, it's great. And he said, but, we think we've got a series. Do you want to produce it? And so I went to Peter and said, can I take a sabbatical? And he said, yes, no, that's fine. Because, we all thought you were going to be doing Big Train, and that didn't happen. So I went off and did the first series of Peep Show, but then went back to Talkback. And it was a year before Channel 4 commissioned the second series of Peep Show. But in that time, then I said to Peter, well, can I go and do another series? And he sort of went, oh, really, do you have to? You can't keep coming and going, you're working for me. So then Andrew kind of sort of made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I was keen to do the second series of Peep Show. So I sort of then joined the company. But it was very small, and it was a really small office up an archway, and it was a really exciting time to be part of a company that started to grow. And I was sort of, some of my most exciting years were those early years at Objective. I loved it. And just being part, when you're in a small company and you make a show, it really counts. Everything really counts. And, it was lovely to be part of that. And, as I say, I learned a lot off Andrew as well. So it was a valuable time.
You mentioned Peep Show, which ran for 30 episodes. What do you think was the secret to the show's longevity?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of Sam and Jesse's writing and Robert and David's performance. It's one of those things where, Robert and David totally got Sam and Jesse, and vice versa. And so the four of them had a brilliant chemistry and a shorthand. And Robert and David were very respectful of Sam and Jesse's writing, and similarly, the guys were very respectful of their performances and what they brought to the show. So I think it was a sort of coincidence, wouldn't be entirely true, because I think it was Kevin Lygo who had said, Mitchell and Webb had done a pilot which Channel 4 didn't pick up, but he said to, I think, Andrew O'Connor, those two are really good. Why don't you put them in your show? So it was one of those moments where sort of, it was all put together. But I think it was that the chemistry between the four of them was it just clicked. And that is, happy accent. And yeah.
When did you know to finish it with that sort of the 30th episode? Or could it have even run for longer? Or were you, confident like this is the time to bring it to a close?
Yeah, I think it was, I think it was very much in Sam and Jesse's power as to when they should stop doing it. I think they stopped at exactly the right time, really. You know, when it was started, the first two series were very much about what it meant to be a 20-something living in a flat and really not knowing where your life's going, and that late 20s where you're not really, you can't sort of claim you're just young, and you sort of have that horrible thing coming up of like, I've really have got to be a grown up in a minute, and that sort of merging, and that sort of
I still feel that, Phil.
entirely. So you've got that, and I think it was very much about that, you know, partly at the beginning. It's like, you know, late 20s, you know, where are we going? And we've got to make some decisions. And so, and, you know, and was it 10, 11 years it spanned. And I think Sam and Jesse were very good at addressing the fact, we never pretended that they were still young men. You know, the characters grew up across the series. So they were sort of acknowledging that they were sort of approaching 40 when they were approaching 40, and that nothing had changed, and that, so they kept it going. But at the same time as well, I think, you know, once you've written those many episodes, and just you know, time to say goodbye while it's still good. And they wrote a blinding final series. I thought it was really terrific, and good to leave it, you know, sort of in good nick, really, wanting more. So yeah.
You were head of comedy at Channel 4 for a number of years, which was a big milestone in your career. Had you been working towards that goal for a while once you started working for Channel 4, and what did that mean to you to sort of be behind that tunnel?
Yeah, it meant a lot to me, and because I'd spent most of my career as a producer working for Channel 4, but not by any plan, just by pleasant accident, really. But I think, you know, Brass Eye, Star Stories, Peep Show, you know, these are all you know, fresh meat. They were all Channel 4 shows, and so, and I felt also great fondness and affinity to Channel 4 because it started when I was a student, and it felt like, you know, as a young man, suddenly there was a channel on television which was for us, you know, for young people, and you know, a new young comedy, and that was really exciting. So I felt that, you know, Channel 4 was our channel. You know, very different landscape nowadays. So there was all that, and so I had a great affinity and affection for Channel 4. I think also the Channel 4 job, head of comedy, is you know, one of the best jobs in comedy, because you're not so bound by some of the requirements of running a big mainstream channel. So, you know, it's a very, very difficult job to be overseeing comedy on BBC One and BBC Three. You know, that's a very broad spectrum. And then what's liberating about working at Channel 4 is just the brief is innovate, be creative, try something different. It doesn't mean it always succeeds, but it's a brilliant palette and an opportunity to go, oh, let's try this, let's try that. And also not to have to worry about booking established people all the time. I felt very strongly that Channel 4 was about new people, and you know, it's difficult to get into the industry. So really what should happen is people should start on Channel 4 and then they should move across and over. So a good example of someone who did that brilliantly was Harry Hill, who did a couple of series on Channel 4, great, you know, young comic, and then he moved on to ITV and, you know, and did more established stuff. And I think that was the way it should be. And I think there should be a flow of talent going through Channel 4 all the time, and that Channel 4 should be, and it still does, you know, engage and employ new talent and try things that sometimes don't work, but you know, it's but when they do, it's
magic.
Brilliant. Yeah, exactly. And so if you're the head of that, it's really liberating and lovely just to say, you know, okay, come on, let's give it a go, let's try this. And so that's a real, you know, it's a real privilege to be in a position where you can shape things for a while. But I don't think you should do it for too long either, because you sort of forget. I'm very mindful of the pressures that commissioners are under, and producers will frequently moan about commissioners, but I sort of, having been on the other side, you also appreciate, you know, what difficulties and troubles and things they're trying to juggle as well. So although it's a brilliant thing to be a commissioner. The sad thing about being a commissioner, the depressing thing about, is that you are, again, having to say no to things most of the time. You know, 90% you have to say no. There just isn't the money. There isn't the slots. There isn't that. And that can be heartbreaking sometimes, because sometimes you're saying no to projects which you know in your heart are really good and, you know, deserve a shot. But not everyone can have a go at the same time.
Yeah. Now, it's clear to me, just listening to you talk, that your career path, being an actor, being sort of, you know, not in a commissioning position, it's really helped you become a better producer, because you've been at all these levels of the industry, and that's just giving you perspective, which is very, very helpful, I imagine.
Yeah, no, it's nice to do a bit of everything, and it's like everything in the world, isn't it? You sort of like, as soon as you occupy someone else's job, you suddenly go, oh my God, I suddenly oh no, it's not as easy, and this is this and that's that.
I wanted to ask about chewing gum, because that was the first time you worked with Michaela Cole. What do you remember about your first interactions with her?
Yeah, well, I've got dropped a line by John Rolfe, who was running Retort, the company that ran Retort, and who made chewing gum. And he said, oh, would you come to this thing? We're going to have a read through, and in Church Hall, which was filmed. And I didn't go. I sent the commissioner, Rachel Springett, to go and have a look at this show. Anyway, they sent us a tape, and I thought, this is really good. And it was just a rough reading in the hall. And to cut a long story short, we commissioned a blap from John and Michaela, and it was
can you just explain what that is?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so a comedy blap is a short, usually Channel 4, I think, still do them now. They're sort of short, 3-minute, usually three-minute sketches, and they used to go up on online, and I think you can still see them. You might even still be able to see the original Blap of Chewing Gum. I'm not sure, but you know, on all four. So Michaela made this short from her play, Chewing Gum Dreams, and it was just really good. It was really good. Even right from the beginning, you could see there was like this person. It goes back to what I was saying about they know what's funny. You know, they understand what's funny about themselves and how they see the world and their vision, and how funny that is. And she was great. She was great, and was already talking to camera even in the blap straight away. That was already formed.
Fantastic.
So I thought, yeah, no, this is a bit of a star performance, and you know, this person can write. She knows what's funny. So right off, it was it was sort of pretty obvious that you know, Michaela was someone that, you know, the channel should have been backing just straight away.
Yeah. And then obviously that has now led to I May Destroy You, which is a show that has been having people talking for the past several months, and for good reason. Where does that show rank for you among your career accomplishments?
Oh yeah, no, very, you know, very proud of it, and very grateful to be part of it. You know, Michaela sort of just popped in one afternoon and said, do you want to do a show? So I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. Come on, let's do a show. And then
it was that simple.
It was that simple, actually. Fun enough, it was. Just popped in for a cup of tea and was chatting. She said, I want to do a show. And we sort of, yes, okay, let's do it. It was very, very straightforward.
I'm going to try this, Phil, you know, and now that I know that you can do it, I'm just going to pop into your office one day. Phil, I got an idea for a show.
Sort of welcome, really. I'll sort of go on to the office a bit later, actually. I'm glad you asked me about that. But, so yeah, she just sort of literally popped in and said, let's do a show. And it's like, yeah, okay, let's do it. You know, it was pretty straightforward. We then went to the BBC and sort of pitched it to the BBC, and Piers there was incredibly supportive and encouraging, and sort of went, yeah, okay, come on, you guys, you crack on with it. And I remember us sort of all leaving BBC Broadcasting House thinking that really doesn't happen that often, you know. So we were very lucky, and again, HBO, really brilliant support, both BBC and HBO on the shows. And earlier on I was talking about, you know, producer's job is to sort of, you know, part of the job is to navigate the expectations of the broadcaster and what the creative wants to make, and sort of slightly bring them together with, particularly protecting, whoever the creative is. But this was a real meeting of minds, and they were really encouraging right from the beginning, to her vision and what she wanted to do. So, it was a really pleasant experience. It's not always the case, and sometimes you end up making a show with the broadcaster sort of says, "Oh, we weren't really expecting that."
Yeah.
But this was not the case. It was a real meeting of minds.
Fantastic. You were talking earlier about how one of your responsibilities is sort of the welfare of the people on set, and some of the scenes in I May Destroy are pretty sensitive. What conversations are you having with Michaela and the rest of the team in the build up to that, filming that, and then even on the day?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, actually, because some of the scenes are quite traumatic and potentially upsetting as well. So we had an intimacy director. We also had a therapist there if people wanted to avail themselves of that, if they were upset or by anything. And our intimacy director, along with the director Sam and Michaela, who was co-directing certainly the shows from 4 to 12. Again, an important team thing, working with the actors and really making sure everyone understood what was required, and everyone was agreed right at the beginning how they were going to play the scene. So it's all about good communication, I think, and nobody being surprised by anything, and also listening to what people are comfortable doing and what they're not doing. And the cast were brilliant, because often it's about understanding how important this scene is in the story, or what this means. And I think that's also important for that everyone understands that. But it's a process as well. The cast often get to hear the whole series for the first time at a read through, and that's often a very valuable process where we spent 2 days reading through the whole series so that everyone could hear it. So yeah, but again, it's just making sure that everyone is really comfortable, and there are no surprises, and why is that important, and how we can do it. But Ita, the intimacy director, was brilliant with the cast as well, and I think she worked very closely with them to put them at their ease and to make sure that no one was doing anything that they didn't want to do or felt uncomfortable with. Yeah,
100%. There's a lot of memorable scenes in I May Destroy. Was there any one scene that you really wanted to make sure that you were on set for?
That's a good question, actually. And as an executive, I wasn't on set that often in the filming. A producer, I would be there every day, but an exec producer, not. I would say I was probably on set probably once or twice a week. So, the filming process was quite, not at a distance, but I wouldn't be there 24/7 like I would if I was producing. And a lot of scenes actually, required a closed set. So in fact, the less people that were hanging around, the better.
I can't talk about I May Destroy without talking about the Golden Globes. We are recording this the day or 2 days, the day after the Golden Globe nominations have been announced, and for some reason, I May Destroy You is not on there. It's frustrating me because I'm such a big fan of the show, but I'm sure you have thoughts on, why, how it's not on there. I mean, what was your reaction to seeing those nominations?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it is disappointing when you sort of thing, and we it had a big impact in the States as well.
This is why I'm like, what is going on?
So I guess the honest answer is we don't know, but I think we've all of us are philosophical about it, and it's just another day, in television. I think that the silver lining, which would be, I hope is the case, is I think it will probably intrigue more people to go and watch the show. you know, and it did well. It had a, you know, it's had a large audience on BBC iPlayer, but if more people go and see the show, then, you know, because of the controversy around it, or the, you know, bit of noise around the fact that it wasn't, you know, nominated, that would be fantastic. And I think really it's just upwards and onwards. You know, earlier on I was talking about, you know, your career is mostly about rejection and dealing with rejection.
Right.
It's just, you know, it's how you deal with it. Inexplicable, but, you know.
Inexplicable is the word. One of the things, again, which a producer is tasked with is budget and keeping an eye on it. Is there any instance in your career where budget has been a concern? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Yeah, it's a, again, that's a very good question, because the skill of producing is actually making the best show possible with the resources that you have. And, you know, there are often things that you can't do because of a budget. And as a producer, you are responsible to, you know, bring that in on budget, you know, or to land that craft on budget. But you're also responsible to make the show as best as possible. And you are constantly juggling those two sort of requirements. And often it's about making a good editorial call. So it's often saying, well, look, we can't, and understanding what the joke is. For example, if you're a comedy producer and you go, okay, that's a really good joke, we can't afford to film, you know, it on a boat, for example, but how can we do this joke on a bus or on something that we can afford, or on a, or, you know, just on the street or something? And it's understanding when to make the call and say, okay, we're going to cut that, or we're going to relocate that, but it's the same joke, we're just going to work it but different. And then other times to say, no, we're doing this, this is really important, you know, absolutely no question, we're filming this, and we will find something else later on, you know, not to do. So it's balancing those two things all the time, you know, and it is a trick, it's a tightrope that you just sort of have to walk, and be nimble sometimes as well. And that's why it's important to work closely with your director and your writers, and that, so that you can come up with solutions together. The first thing that happens with filming is that everything goes wrong. It always does. You spend weeks planning everything out, and within a week it's usually gone completely wrong, and then you just have to sort of improvise from there. So yeah.
It's all about problem solving.
Yeah, it is. And again, what we were saying earlier about telling people things they don't really want to hear. You know, it's not a pleasant thing to have to go and tell a writer that, you know, that brilliant thing they've written, we can't do.
Yeah.
And often as a producer, I tend to just say to a writer, look, write the best thing you can. Don't worry about the budget to start off with. Write the best possible thing. Then once you've written the best possible thing, then we'll hold it up against the budget, and then we will have to probably make some compromises. But don't block yourself first. Don't edit yourself, self-edit first from what you think might be affordable or not affordable. You know, write it, and then, but there will be a moment where I have to sit down and go, okay, we can do this and this, but we can't do this, and you know, let's rewrite.
Yeah. By the same token, I guess necessity is the mother of creativity. So is there any time when a budget problem or any other problem really has actually led to a really creative solution that has made the project better than what the original idea maybe even was?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really good point. Is often if you say to a writer, well, we can't, you know, we can't shoot that, they'll go away and write a better scene. They'll, you know, write something that's even better. And it goes back to me talking about that pilot virus, is that, you know, certainly in comedy, I think you have to approach it by going, look, there's always a better joke around the corner, and be confident that you're going to think of something that's even better than, you know, perhaps what's already written on the page. Yeah.
If 2021 Phil Clarke could give one piece of producing advice to 1990s Phil Clarke, what would that piece of advice be?
Keep going. Absolutely keep going. That would be my advice to everybody as well. As I say, it's you know, making a show is an emotional roller coaster. Pitching shows and trying to get them made, shows that you love that you can't convince other people that need making. You know, these are that is the bread and butter of being a producer, and that's what you will spend most of your time doing. And part of it, as I said earlier, is an attritional thing that you just have to keep going, and you keep rolling and believing that you will always come up with a better idea, or that times will change. And yeah, don't give up. There's a good example which I cite quite a lot, is Fresh Meat, which we made for Channel 4.
Right.
It took 3 years to get that commissioned, and that was with Sam and Jesse as the writers, who were already established and, you know, fated and award-winning writers, and it still took us 3 years to get that across the line. So it doesn't change, but yeah, don't give up, and also trust yourself, which is also quite a hard thing to do sometimes. But trust your instincts, because every time I've not, it's been a mistake.
Absolutely. So what's the best way, would you say, is for a young person to get into the producing game these days?
Yeah, it is. It's really hard. And I say there's no route, and there's no, you know, there's no producer school. There's no exam which goes, I've got my producer diploma, therefore, you know, anyone can call themselves a producer at any time. I think the important thing is, you know, looking back, I was lucky enough to be on the circuit. You know, now there's things like YouTube. There are, you know, other places which you can access and do stuff, but without having to sort of, you know, sell to somebody. So the most important thing is sort of get going yourself. You know, either perform, either write, do some stuff on YouTube, do some, you know, do stuff wherever you can. So that's one thing, which is like, be self-starting. Don't wait for someone to give you a job. Find a way to make something, even if it's just, you know, doing something for your own pleasure, but be self-starting. And the other one is, you know, you know, it's very rare that you're going to go in as a producer, and you know, you have to pay your dues, and be ambitious, but also be prepared to, you know, make the teas and you know, and do a bit of running or whatever it is to get where eventually you want to go. It's a long campaign, so it's not, you know, it's not an instant mix where you just add water and bang, you're a producer. You know, learn the trade as well, and that means sometimes coming up the hard way and just taking any opportunity that comes your way, anything, just to get in and keep going. Really, honestly, keep going, because no is going to be the answer most of the time.
I hear that. I know that you're also a big fan of the 18th month National Film and Television School Comedy Writing and Producing Diploma. What is it that you love about that program? And is that still sort of something you recommend that people do?
Yeah, no, definitely. I would recommend doing anything like that, you know, sort of any course, anything that gives you experience, where you meet other people as well, possibly of the same generation, trying to do the same thing. There's a power in that as well. I used to go, you know, once a year and have a chat. Bill does classes. You know, very famous and fated producer, Bill, and really knows the business, really knows how it works. Any of those things, you know, do them. You know, try and get stuck in, because you will learn things from each other. And you know, if you've got the opportunity to sit in a room with someone like Bill Dare for, you know, quite a few evenings, that's gold dust. He's going to tell you some, you know, really important things about how to survive as much as possible in industry, and how to improve your writing. So no, I'm a big fan of those. I think, you know, it is hard to get into the business, and so anything that gives you an edge or a bit of more experience or a contact is valuable.
100%. And that is all we have time for today. Phil, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a fantastic chat. Everyone, there are 2 more days of the festival left, with a number of exciting events, which are all free and available to watch worldwide. You can find all the information on them and how to register on the BFI Feature Film Festival website and on the BFI Film Academy social channels. Stay safe and God bless.